evidence
respect
for
to
it.
social contagion specifically, though, this like because this idea of a very synthetic feeling illness with like because a lot of people in the health freedom space have shared these sentiments, and I wonder if that came about largely because of the effect of social contagion. Like because people were
Yeah.
talking about this feeling and this type of illness that they hadn't seen or experienced before. So many people were talking about that. So I wonder if this social contagion aspect plays into the actual manifestation of these
Sure.
quote weird symptoms.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. This has been demonstrated, this effect, in numerous experiments, this social contagion effect. So just by telling people what to expect, they will manifest those symptoms. It doesn't matter what the symptoms are. You can get people to manifest cold and flu symptoms. You can get people to manifest symptoms of altitude sickness. You can get people to manifest all kinds of things,
Giving
of
people sugar
symptoms
pills
like,
and telling them that it's cancer treatment and their hair falls out. This has been documented as well.
yeah, I've documented all of these different things in my book, like even cases of people with inoperable tumors that are riddling their body the size of oranges all over their body. And they get a drug that they believe is an anti-cancer treatment, and the tumors shrink and go away, and the person is better in a month. Documented in the medical literature. So the power of the mind is incredibly powerful. We don't give ourselves enough credit for that. Here's another example. There was this university professor in Turin, in Italy, that wanted to take his students up to the top of the Italian Alps, and he wanted to test this social contagion effect. I think there was like 60 or 70 students that wanted to go with him on this trip. He told one student that when you go to a certain altitude in the Alps, you develop these certain symptoms, like a headache and nausea and these kinds of things. And the only way to cure it is with a very specific dose of aspirin. Now, he only told one student. That was a couple of weeks before they went on the trip. Just before they went on the trip, the professor had a very large percentage of students concerned contacting him going, "Oh my God, I'm really scared of getting this illness. Can you tell me what dose of aspirin I need to take to prevent it?" Now, what he found was that those students who contacted him, who he hadn't told about this mysterious altitude sickness, they actually experienced the worst symptoms when they were going up the mountain. And he measured their blood for inflammatory chemicals, and they had the highest levels of inflammatory chemicals than anyone else in the group compared to the students who didn't contact him, who weren't concerned about it, right? So he told one person, it spread throughout the community, this idea, and then they manifested a severe illness with their minds. So yeah, if you're told that there's this synthetic virus, there's this lab leak virus, and you're going to get these symptoms, of course you can manifest it with your mind. You can manifest basically any symptom with your mind. As you said, like this effect is strong enough to make people's hair fall out. Like it really is incredible. It's strong enough to reverse cancer. So if it's powerful enough to do those things, why can't it make your nose a bit runny? Or like, why can't you manifest a loss of smell or taste?
Right.
These things don't seem unfathomable to me.
It's interesting too, anecdotally, is a few people that I know that experience this phenomenon of extended loss of taste and smell were able to reverse it doing some meditative practices and some, let's say, psychosomatic based stuff, dealing with the mind, which is really interesting, and it sort of lends credence to what you're talking about here, this being a product of the mind. And without getting into the you know the nature of reality, but it sort of leads one there. I think that's where this ends up going the more that you go down this line of questioning of like what comes first, matter or mind. right? And I don't want to go there for the sake of this conversation because I still have some questions, but I know that we've talked offline briefly about that. Speaking largely to the health freedom space, because that is my audience. I don't think I'm trying to convince normies at this point, but I'm really excited to get your book into the laps of people because I know that the way you carry yourself and the way that I've seen you write before, that this is something that you could deliver to virtually anyone and it'll probably make sense. But because my audience is not that, I've had a lot of people who have heard some of the talks that I've given, or maybe they watched just a little bit of the end of COVID. I'm thoroughly convinced they did not watch the whole thing because if they had, there's just there's just no way they could still possibly conclude, in my mind, that viruses exist, absent of a strong belief on their part. But that will say, well, I have 2, 3 kids, or my kids go to daycare, and I see illness spread through my house and I know that it's a virus, or, I was someone who was not careful and I slept with a bunch of different guys and then I got an STD. And I know for the sake of your book, we're talking about, can you catch a cold? But you've also focused on this, and I don't know if it's covered in the book, with respect to other so-called transmissible or contagious illnesses. So do you have any thoughts on that, or is that something that you cover in the book?
Yeah, I had a whole section on other infectious diseases where they essentially failed to transmit: measles, scarlet fever, chickenpox, these kinds of illnesses. Even in the early 1900s, there were hospital wards where researchers were bringing or putting people with chickenpox, children with chickenpox, into wards with healthy children. And very seldom, like we're talking a very, very small percentage of the time, other children got chickenpox. So it wasn't like all of the healthy children in beds next to each other or in beds next to sick children with chickenpox got ill. It didn't happen. It was this very, very rare occurrence that it actually transmits, even to the point where the research was like, I don't think these infectious illnesses transmit through the air, because he couldn't make it happen.
Right.
And then they went as far as like cutting out chickenpox scabs and putting it in people's noses and cutting holes in their arms and putting the scabs into other people's arms and all kinds of stuff. And they never made anyone sick with any of these illnesses. You hear this claim that my kid went to school, picked up something and brought something home, and then it spread to the rest of the family. It doesn't mean that an infectious particle was spread between people. So you are also exposed to other common factors, other common environmental factors. Here's something really interesting. Around the same time as the flu happened in Wuhan, in China, of 2020, there was a thing that happened called the temperature inversion. Now, it's early in the morning here, so I hope I get this right. It's where usually during the day, the sun heats up the earth and the air becomes warm and the hot air rises and it takes away the air pollution. So the air quality is not so bad. But when a temperature inversion happens, you actually get a pocket of cooler air sitting over the top of this warmer air and keeps that warmer polluted air close to the ground. Now, this happens when there's changes in humidity and temperature, essentially. There's a thing called PM 2.5. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, particulate matter 2.5. It's like the most harmful particulate matter in the air. It's very, very small in size. We're talking like brake dust or pollution from factories and this kind of thing. Tire dust from cars, exhaust fumes, this sort of stuff. PM 2.5 is very, very harmful to the human body. Even like bushfires and things create a lot of 2.5 in the smoke. The currently accepted level for human exposure is 5 parts per, I think it's 5 parts per million or micrograms per gram, or for the sake of the conversation, 5 parts per million. In China, when people started getting these respiratory symptoms, a temperature inversion happened and it trapped a lot of the smog over cities that are already heavily polluted They already have poor air quality, and increased the level of pollution to over 700 parts per million. So the acceptable level is 5. The yearly daily average should exceed no more than 15. Yet we had people walking around in 700 parts per million. I think they say somewhere around like a couple of hundred, maybe 200 to 300 is the equivalent of smoking packets of cigarettes per day. So if you're walking around in 700 part per million air quality, of course it's going to make you sick. And this happened in 2019. It also happened in various other pandemics in areas where people got sick. People living in that city would have started getting respiratory symptoms. Was it really because something was spreading between them? Was it really because little Johnny went to school and picked up something and brought it home and now you're all getting sick? Or is it because you're all breathing toxic air? There's also this, like another example of common environmental exposure, Alec. Again, I document this in the book. A mother brought her children to an emergency department with symptoms that were diagnosed as strep throat and scarlet fever. So the doctors believed that this was a transmissible childhood illness that had spread between the siblings. So it was a brother and 2 sisters. They gave them some antibiotics and sent them home. Their symptoms started to get worse in the next few days, and the mother took the children to another emergency department for a second opinion. Turns out that the children had been playing with a vial of mercury. They dropped it on the floor, it broke open, and the mother came with a vacuum and tried to vacuum it up. And that heated up the mercury and dispersed it through the air. Now, the small children, obviously being lower to the ground and their smaller body size, inhaled some of this mercury vapor and they got poisoning. Now, the mother's obviously larger. She can take a lot more inhalation of mercury and they won't be as adversely affected. So she didn't get symptoms, but the children did. And this is why the doctor said it was a childhood infectious illness. But the second emergency department medical doctors realized what had gone on and diagnosed it as mercury poisoning. They went through and started doing chelation therapy to get rid of the mercury. And one of the children ended up having permanent damage because the treatment was delayed because they thought it was an infectious illness. So here's an example. And by the way, in this paper, they explicitly say how mercury exposure can mimic symptoms of a childhood infectious illness. Yeah. They can't distinguish between mercury exposure and these so-called symptoms of scarlet fever. So yeah, was your child really bringing something home, or was there something in your home that you were all commonly exposed to? Was there a common stressor? Was there a common air pollutant? Was there a common environmental factor? Was there a change in the humidity or temperature, which are also known to induce cold and flu symptoms? There's so many other things that you have to account for before you jump to an infectious particle.
Right. Yeah. Wow. You know, it's interesting too, because with respect to polio, let's say, for example, a lot of, I would say most people in the health freedom space have concluded that that was all fraudulent and it was largely based in environmental toxins like DDT or I guess agricultural toxins like DDT and lead arsenic. And it's just interesting that people can't wrap their heads around to the reality that largely this could possibly apply to all these other things. At the very least, that the so-called cause that the authorities say is the cause has never been demonstrated to be the causative agent. But what a lot of people will then say after the virology paradigm has been falsified, right? It's a thoroughly debunked, totally failed hypothesis at this point, and I would say largely the germ paradigm as well. But they'll they'll say, okay, well, viruses might not be the cause, then it must be a bacterial infection. Or a lot more people are doing this, and this one gets on my nerves so bad is, oh, everything is caused by parasites. It's not a virus causing all these symptoms, it's a parasitic infection causing all of these symptoms. So, and again, I know you've covered this quite a bit. I don't know if it's covered in the book, but because I know you've covered this quite a bit elsewhere, I just wanted to sort of lead you to discuss that.
Yeah, I know I covered parasites in the presentation for the end of COVID. I only care about the truth, essentially. And what I presented in the end of COVID, I was talking about parasites as if they were real things and that they detoxified heavy metals and they were there to do a job. And I do presentations for my members where I take a deep dive onto a subject. And I just recently did one on parasites, actually. And my perspective has changed since talking on the end of COVID.
Wow, that quickly.
Yeah.
I appreciate that about you, man. I appreciate that you continue to just dive into topics and continue looking. It's really cool.
This is why I don't hold any position so preciously. If someone came to me with a paper saying, hey, Dan, here, cold and flu is contagious, here it is. And I look at it and go, oh, okay, I was wrong. Like, I'll recant my position. Parasites, I don't actually think they're there to clean up a mess. I think what we've seen with the issues plaguing virology, we also are seeing with parasites. Yeah, so I'm not talking about worms, helminths, these larger organisms that you can see with a light microscope.
Right.
Yeah, like, or you can see with the naked eye. I'm not talking about these things. They clearly are real. I'm talking about the single-celled, so-called single-celled prokaryote parasites, like Blastocystis homini or Cryptosporidium or these things. I question whether they are even real entities, like, because when you look at the literature, pathologists have a really difficult time distinguishing between parasites, these single-celled parasites, prokaryote, and artifacts and other things that are contaminating the sample, like pollen grains or yeast or dirt or dust or cells or fragments of cells that are native to a human being, peach hairs in people's feces, fat globules, like, and this is a really well acknowledged problem in the field of parasitology, is that pathologists have a really hard time distinguishing between these so-called artifacts and parasites. Now, isn't it interesting or how convenient that the parasites that they're so-called looking for are indistinguishable from other things that they're also finding in the feces samples of people? Surely they would have their own unique characteristics that would be easily distinguishable from other things. For example, they thought Blastocystis homini, which is a parasite which is blamed for a lot of gastrointestinal problems, they thought that was a yeast for 70 years. Just a yeast spore. Until the 1970s, when they turned around and said, oh, it's not a yeast, it's actually a parasite. So, yeah, I think the issues that we're seeing with virology, as soon as you start trying to go like microscopic, submicroscopic, I don't think anyone knows really what they're looking at.
Right.
Certainly they haven't, to my understanding, taken pure samples of these parasites, exposed them to healthy people, and shown them to cause disease. Even things like malaria, for example. It's crazy, man. When they take samples from people, they use these various reagents, but it's just so convenient. It just so happens that the reagents that they use when they're staining these samples to look for the malaria parasite cause artifacts which are indistinguishable from the parasite. It's like, it's just like, what are you guys doing?
Right.
It really is just, it's just crazy. So yeah, this is where I'm at the moment with parasites. I really sort of even question whether or not they exist and they do what we're told that they do. Worms and stuff, yeah, they're real. You can see them with your eye. You can get a light microscope and check them out. That's not a problem. But these other ones, I have many questions.
Right. And I wonder, with respect to those worms, if, I won't make a broad statement here, but if for some of them, they are still doing a specific role to remediate your terrain.
Yeah, they bioremediate and biotransform. That's
Right.
what their role is. So in nature, earthworms, mealworms consume toxic substances, even things like plastic, pesticides, heavy metals, and transform them into non-toxic organic substances. Who's to say that the worms out there in the soil that are doing this, and they're even proposing using these worms to bioremediate polluted soil, who's to say that those worms aren't doing the same job as the worms in our gut? So we know that we're exposed. People are eating so much microplastic. You're getting about a credit card sized piece of plastic through your food and water every week.
Crazy.
Now, we know that these worms break down plastic and convert them into organic substances, which can then be used as a fuel source for other organisms. We also know that the presence of these worms inside the gut protects the host tissue and organs from the absorption of these harmful substances across the gut wall into the bloodstream. Some papers are even calling these worms sentinels. They are the guardians. They are the watchers at the gate. They are keeping the stuff out of the system to protect the organs from damage from this stuff. They're not there to cause disease. They are there to protect you from the ill effects of these things that you're being exposed to. So if you're getting exposed to a credit card sized piece of plastic every week, of course worms are going to take up residence inside your gut to break this stuff down. And like a real life example here, we've got some goats out the back that went across to the neighbor's land and they spray pesticides on their crop. Now, those goats have been in perfect health. As soon as they went and ate some of the crops on the land that's been sprayed with pesticide, they started getting worms. You could literally see the worms crawling in their feces. Now, did they just get a chance infection from a parasite? Or was that parasite put there either by nature or by the body to gobble up the parasites that were in, the pesticides that were sprayed on the food they were eating? As soon as we fenced off that area and we prevent them from going onto the neighbor's land, parasite infection went away. So we didn't give them any parasite treatments or anything like that. They went away of their own accord. So I think this is what we're dealing with when it comes to these worms and so-called parasites. They're there to help us. They are sentinels. They are our friends, not our foe.
Yeah, beautifully said. And for those who are listening or watching, I don't want to get off on this topic because this is another rabbit hole, but it largely applies as well with respect to bacteria, fungi, and mold. They are there to bioremediate, let's say, and there's